Exodus chapter 3, we're going to begin in verse 10. Moses had already encountered the burning bush, and we read this passage last week, but we put it off until this one. So let's begin. Verse 10. Therefore come now, and I'll send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, Certainly I will be with you, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Okay, so Moses questions God's decision to have him lead the people out of the land of Egypt. Basically, he asks, who am I? I'm going to take this moment to address the fact that there's a lot of times in our life where God opens up a path for us or a door for us, and we might ask that same question, who am I? Who am I to preach? Who am I to teach a class? Who am I to share the gospel with my neighbor? Who am I to fulfill whatever role God has put me in? We may have questioned our abilities from time to time, but we have to trust in God that if he has opened up a door for us, there's a way for us to go through that door effectively. Now, it may be that God opens up a door for us and we say to a friend, kind of like Moses brought Aaron along, hey, come help me in this study with this individual. It may be that we can do it on our own, but regardless, there is a solution to those problems that arise before us from time to time. Again, like sharing the Bible with a coworker or something like that. So here in Exodus 3, when Moses asks, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt, he's questioning God, and he shouldn't. He should trust God's decision that he is a capable leader, able to bring the people out of the land of Egypt into the land that flows with milk and honey. So God tells Moses in verse 12 that just to prove to you that you're going to be able to do this, there's going to come a time whenever you're going to come right back to this same mountain, and they're going to serve me here. And so the end goal, or rather, I guess the immediate goal for Moses is to get them from Egypt to this mountain. If he can do that, then he'll be able to know that he truly is the leader that God said that he would be. Now in verse 13, Moses says this to God, Behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and then I will say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? Now this is interesting, because why would the children of Israel not know God's name? What do you think?
One reason the children of Israel thought God's name was so holy, they feared to even mention or say the name.
That is true. In your Bible, you see capital L, then sort of a smaller capital O-R-D. That is a placeholder. And really that could be translated I am. But what happened was the copyists and the scribes didn't want to mess up the name of God, and so they put a placeholder there. They had so much respect for it. And really the pronunciation of that four-letter word that is God's name has been lost. Nobody really knows how to pronounce it like it was originally pronounced. Because they had so much respect for it, they didn't even use it. They used the term Adonai or Adonai, however you want to pronounce it. And here in the scripture, the word that's behind this is the word Yahweh, and you're probably familiar with that. But many choose not to use that word out of respect towards the name. But it's interesting, you have to remember what has been going on. Johnny?
Right, you're saying that he was asking, what should I tell them your name? And he told them to tell them that I am. You know, I'm quite sure that the children of Israel, Jacob descendants, they were taught about God. They knew the history of Abraham, Isaac, all the way down to Jacob. So they knew this. So if they asked and if he repeat their name to them, they would know, hey, okay, it's true. He had to have been the one that sent them.
Good point. Good point. Another thing that you might consider is that remember, these people have been in Egyptian captivity for 400 years, and you got all these Egyptians talking about all these various gods. And so they're going to say, well, which God do you follow? And that's whenever, as Johnny said, he announces that he is Yahweh. All right, let's see. Okay. Verse 15, God furthermore said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations, or to the generations of generations. So in verse 15, God clarifies who he is. So here's my name, but here's who I am. I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So going back to their history to show them that this is the God who led Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees into Canaan. This is the God who gave Jacob his name Israel, and this is the God who was with Joseph all of the years that he lived. And so from this announcement, they should be more than willing to listen to Moses. But let's keep reading. So God says, go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and Jacob, hath appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I'll bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite, to the land flowing with milk and honey. They will pay heed to what you say, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. All right. So God tells Moses, you want to go to the leaders of Israel, tell them who I am, tell them who sent you, tell them that I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and get them to go with you to Pharaoh and say, we need some space to worship our God, so we want to go out to the wilderness for 3 days and get that taken care of. But, verse 19, the king of Egypt, I know the king of Egypt will not permit you to go except under compulsion, or except by a strong hand. So I'll stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles, which I shall do in the midst of it, and after that he will let you go. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. But every woman shall ask her neighbor and the woman who lives in her house articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians. All right, pretty straightforward. Not really too hard to follow this command. You just take the elders of Israel, go before Pharaoh. When he rejects your offer, everything's going to be okay, and I'm going to take care of it. Then you can go. But Moses says this, verse 1 of chapter 4. What if they'll not believe me or listen to what I say? For they may say the Lord has not appeared to you. See, Moses always has an excuse. Even though God told them they're going to believe you and they're going to go with you, and this and this and this is going to happen in this exact order, Moses is still like, I'm not sure. What if they don't believe me? And, this has probably happened to all of us at some point. The path is laid out. We know what we have to do. And yet, because of a lack of confidence in ourselves, or maybe a lack of confidence in the person that's been put before us, we may not present the gospel to them. Or we may do so in sort of a half-hearted manner. We might not give it our all. And we can make excuses all day, but we have to trust in the plan that God has set before us. Johnny?
And some of the reason he had some of his questions and doubt was because these are the same people that he's going back to, the reason that he left Egypt. Because after he had told us, hey, why are you fighting against yourself? Your brothers, and you're going to kill us like you did the Egyptians.
Right.
So that was the reason he fled. So if he go back, people are going to start talking again. He felt like people are going to start talking again. Hey, now, Pharaoh's going to know I was the one who killed one of his servants. Right,
exactly. Let me look this up real quick. I think I'm right, but I'm going to check to make sure. For some reason, maybe I just made that up then. For some reason, I thought that he was 40 years old when he left Egypt.
Yeah.
And 40 years old when he came back. Or rather, 80 years old when he came back. Yeah, 80 years old when he came back.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Right. That's right.
All right.
Divided up in 40 years, 340, and they get 120.
That's right.
So, 40 years in the wilderness.
That's right. So one of the key points about this was that God appeared to him in the bush after the Pharaoh that had wanted Moses dead had already passed away. Okay, let's get back to chapter 4 and verse 2. So the Lord says to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A staff." Then he said, "Throw it to the ground." So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses fled from it. That just makes you laugh, right? I mean, you just think, you can just picture that perfectly in your head. God says, "What do you have in your hand there?" He says, "Well, this is my staff. You know, I've carried it with me for 40 years, tending to these sheep. It's been in my possession all the time. I lay it up against the wall before I go to bed." He says, "Well, throw it on the ground." All right. And he throws it on the ground. It becomes this big snake. I mean, think about something. You know, somebody tells you, "What's that in your hand?" "What's my cell phone?" "How long have you had it?" "Well, I've had it, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now." They make you get a new one every couple of years or so, I guess. He says, "All right, throw it on the ground." You throw it on the ground, it becomes like a little dog. You know, what would you do? You'd try to run away from that, right? It'd kind of be a little bit scary. So this is what happens to Moses. He becomes a snake, and he flees. He gets away, gets out of there. And remember, he's got his shoes off, so he's running across all those rocks. That might kind of hurt. But he's gone, right? He doesn't want anything to do with that snake. But the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand and grasp it by its tail." So he stretched out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. "That they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Now, think about this maybe a layer deeper. Moses starts off by fleeing from the snake, and then when God gives him the command, he's able to reach down and take it up, and it becomes a staff in his hand. So this is kind of a picture of what's happened in this whole scenario. God told Moses, "You need to go down to Egyptian, do this, this, and this." And Moses is trying to run away and flee. And yet God is going to tell him to pick it up, and it'll become a staff in your hand. In other words, he can have complete control of the situation because God's on his side. And this short little scenario here with the staff and the snake kind of is a representation of the bigger picture here. If Moses would just listen to God's instructions, he'd be able to accomplish anything that God told him to accomplish. Anybody have anything? Okay. All right, verse 6. And God says, "I got another one for you." The Lord furthermore said to him, "Put your hand in your bosom." So he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then he said, "Put your hand into your bosom again." So he put his hand into his bosom again. When he took it out of his bosom, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Notice he's not, running away from this one. He's kind of got, okay, I see the pattern here. God's going to tell me to do something. He's going to reverse it, so we're all good. But still, having leprosy, that's a death sentence, right? For most people. And that's why you have those camps of the lepers outside of the main area there, because they were considered unclean under the Old Covenant, right? And so, of course, this wasn't under the Old Covenant just yet, but God gives him these signs to demonstrate to the people of Israel to show that they were truly following a man of God. All right, verse 8, he tells them this: "If they will not believe you or heed the witness of the first sign, they may believe the witness of the last sign. But if they will not believe even these two signs or heed what you say, then you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water which you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground." So here is a third and a final sign that he can show to them to demonstrate that that he truly is a man of God. So the first sign was to throwing the stick on the ground, turning it into a snake. The second sign was putting his hand into his bosom and it coming out leprosy, and putting it back and making it whole again. And then the third sign was taking the water from the Nile and throwing it on the ground and becoming blood. Now, we told you a couple weeks ago, kind of talked about this throughout the entire episode of the Exodus, how that the Egyptians personified the Nile and treated it as if it was a god. And so, with Moses doing this, he again is showing God's superiority over any of the so-called gods of Egypt. And so he's demonstrating to them that he is going to be able to lead them out of the land. All right? Now, after all this, you would reckon that Moses would be up and ready to go. Let's go get it taken care of, God. I got the staff in my hand. I got the blood, I got the water turned into blood ready to go. I'm ready to get my hand stricken and then healed. But Moses says this, verse 10. Then Moses said to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since you've spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." Now that might be an excuse that we've all used from time to time, right? Who am I to spread the gospel? I can't put a sentence together. Hardly even to convince someone that Jesus died and rose from the grave. That's got to be a tough message to sell. And yet God tells Moses, right here in verse 11, "Who made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I, even I, will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to say." So God is with Moses all these steps of the way. Moses, who am I to go? He says, I'm going to be with you, go. Well, who do I tell him sent me? Tell him that it's I am. Tell him that I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, well, they're probably not going to believe me anyways. Okay, here's your 3 miracles to perform to convince them that you are legitimate. And now he says, okay, that's great. I got the miracles. I've got your name. I know that you'll be with me, but God, I'm not a very good talker. I can't speak very well, not very eloquent. But he says finally in verse 13, but he said, "Please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will," which, God wants Moses. And so then the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. Now, interesting note. Didn't God just show Moses these 3 miracles? And yet he still didn't believe. And so if Israel wasn't willing to accept these 3 miracles, then his anger would kindle against them as well. And so he's seen these 3 miracles, or he knows of these 3 miracles, and he still didn't believe. He still wasn't wanting to go. And so the anger of the Lord burned against Moses, and he said, "Is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he speaks fluently, and moreover, behold, he is coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You are to speak to him, and put the words in his mouth, and I, even I, will be with your mouth and his mouth, and I will teach you what you are to do. Moreover, he shall speak for you to the people, and he will be as a mouth for you, and you will be as God to him. Then you shall take in your hands this staff, which you will perform the signs." So God basically says, you want somebody to talk for you? Here's your brother Aaron. He's coming out to meet you right now. He's going to do it. End of story. Take the staff. You are going to perform these signs. You are going to take the people out of the land of Egypt. Done. No more. You can kind of see God's irritation with Moses here. And you've probably seen this with a parent to a child or a coach to a player. You're going to do it. Get out there. Get on the line. I don't know what y'all call them. We call them suicides when you ran to the free throw line and back, half court back, free throw line back, full court back. Get out there and run. It's going to be good for you in the long run. You just got to do it, Moses. Come on. And so we've all been there with somebody, I know. And so Moses doesn't have much to say here. He's just got to go back to his father's house, or father-in-law's house, and get this taken care of. Now Moses isn't, a teenager being scolded. He's not in his 20s or his 30s and still trying to figure, things out. He's an 80-year-old man. And this is how he's acting towards God. And so I guess the message there is it's never too old to be stubborn. You can always receive discipline from the scriptures, discipline from God, and we should always be ready to see it and not think that just because we've done certain things for a certain amount of time, or we've been a Christian for so long, right, that we're immune to reprimandation from God's word. So we have to keep our eyes open. He made all these excuses, but God told him enough's enough. It's time for you to go to Egypt. You got to get this taken care of. My people need me. So Moses departed and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, here's what he says, "Please let me go, that I may return to my brethren who are in Egypt, and see if they are still alive." Interesting wording there. And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." Now, do you think that Moses, now this isn't in the text, this is just what you can think. Do you think he's going back there thinking, "Oh, please say no, Jethro, don't let me go"? I can imagine that maybe he was thinking to himself, "I really hope he makes me stay and keep working on these sheep. I really don't want to go to Egypt." But Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." Now remember, he is a priest for God, right? We read that back in chapter 3 and verse 1. And so he probably, he probably knew that there was something more to it than Moses just going to see if his people were still alive. All right. Where did I go? There we go, verse 19. "Now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, 'Go back to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life are dead.'" So there goes back to what Johnny was saying a while ago. God eases his mind here and says, look, you don't have anything to worry about. Everybody that wants you dead, they're gone. You'll be okay. So Moses took his wife and his sons and mounted them on a donkey and returned to the land of Egypt. Moses also took the staff of God in his hand. Now notice that all these years, who knows how long he's had this staff working with the sheep. And now it's the staff of God. So there's something that the staff wasn't special within and of itself. But whenever it was connected to this miracle that Moses was going to do, when it was connected to God, then it became special. And so let's relate this another way. You may look at your life as just being a boring old staff. You work, you do what you're supposed to do, but there's nothing really special of you. But if you allow God to use your life in a mighty way, now you become a child of God, a person of God. You're not just a regular old, boring old, everyday staff, working with the sheep for all these years. Now you're a staff of God, right? And so we have to allow God into our lives, go through those doors of opportunity that He opens up for us to become true people of God, all right? In other words, as I guess it's sort of a Mr. Rogers type thing to say, which I guess I am Mr. Rogers in a way, but we're all special just the way you are. And so you don't have to be some great, beautiful staff made of gold and diamonds and silver to mean something. You just have to be a child of God or a person that can be used for God. Zelda?
Years ago they used to always say that Church of Christ people used to always carry their Bibles all the time. So you used to always know a Church of Christ person. And today, there's still people carrying their Bibles, but yet they don't see and they don't recognize, because 9 out of 10, you look at a person and you say a person that carries their cell phone, they have the Bible in there.
Most likely.
But yet, see, like Moses, he carried that staff for the longest, and he didn't know that Word of God right there with him.
Right.
We have the Word of God, and we still carry it through our Bibles, in our cell phones and stuff. See, we just don't utilize it until it's so open up to us.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Everybody's got one.
Yeah.
And even if they don't have a Bible on their phone, they can download one in a few seconds if they got the right phone. But that's like this. I got this. I've got the paper Bible that I use, but this one I can do searches. I can look at the Greek. I can do all kinds of stuff that I can't do in my normal Bible. So it's really helpful for someone like me who's I guess they call us nerds. Is that what they call us? But it's fun. It's fun to use. But okay. 21. Let's try to get through this chapter. We're going to kind of leave the Exodus story, chopped off at the beginning. So I'll lead you up to Egypt, and then I'm going to cut you off, and you got to finish the story by yourself, and we'll go to another character. Since we're just kind of giving an overview of different Bible characters. All right, verse 21. The Lord said to Moses, "When you go back to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders which I've put in your power, but I'll harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord God." Laura, can you hand me my notebook? Thus says the Lord God, "Israel is my son, my firstborn." Now, we talked about the significance of this verse in times past. Israel is my son, my firstborn. Whenever you think about Jesus, Jesus is God's son, right? Jesus is the only begotten of the Father, John 3:16. Jesus is the firstborn of the new creation, Revelation chapter 3. Now, what is interesting about that is that we see that there's many passages in the Old Testament, prophecies that were made about Israel, that in the New Testament are applied to Jesus, kind of like the one we studied on Sunday nights a couple weeks ago, Hosea Chapter 11, verse 1. Out of Egypt I called my son, right? And so there is solidarity between Jesus and the people of Israel. What happens to him happens to the people as a whole. And so what Jesus does, this is New Testament stuff, but Jesus dies on the cross, he's buried, and he rises again the third day. And what that did for Israel was transform them. Started this transformation out of the old covenant into the new covenant, out of the bloods of goats and calves, and into the perfect sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And so this verse back here seems to just be a passing comment in the Old Testament, but it becomes a fairly significant verse in the New Testament. I got to write down. Sometimes I come across a passage and I want to look at it later, but I always forget, so I got to write it down here, or otherwise I won't remember. See, it's handy to have a notebook like that you can come back to every now and then. All right. So he says, "This is Israel, my son, my firstborn." Now, what is the significance of the firstborn, especially in a royal family, right? We see the firstborn is significant all throughout Israel's history, which really, if you're in the book of Genesis, you kind of want to be the secondborn, unless you're Abel, I guess, but still he was righteous in God's eyes. But Israel is my son, my firstborn. See, Pharaoh alleges himself to be God on earth, right? So his son is the son of deity. His son is going to be Pharaoh one day, presumably, and be God on earth as well, God incarnate as well. So here's what he says to Pharaoh, or here's what he is to say to Pharaoh. Israel is Yahweh's firstborn. So now we have this matchup in the one corner. We have Pharaoh who alleges himself to be one of the gods of Egypt and all of the gods in the pantheon of the Egyptian religion, versus Israel and his father, right, Yahweh. And basically this is the battle of the gods to see who it is that's going to be, champion, right? And it's just to show that Israel's God is true, he exists, he's real, versus the Egyptian gods that were made up to celebrate the Nile or celebrate fertility or celebrate the sun or something like that. All right, verse 23 says, "So I said to you, let my son go that he may serve me. But you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will kill your son, your firstborn. Since you mistreated my firstborn and abused him and hurt him, I'm going to take your firstborn away from you," is the idea. Now it came about at the lodging place on the way that the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and threw it at Moses' feet, and said, "You are indeed a bridegroom of blood to me." So he let him alone. And at that time she said, "You are a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision." So this passage just pops out of nowhere at you, right? You're going along, you're reading, everything's going fine between Moses and God, and all of a sudden it came about at the lodging place on the way that the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. He was going to put Moses to death because he hadn't circumcised his son.
Yeah. I was going to say, I never heard that translation before. What Bible you got? It said bride of blood?
Bridegroom. What does yours say?
It says a bloody husband.
A bloody husband? Okay, I guess that's the same difference.
Yeah, I was on that. What translation is it?
New American Standard.
New American Standard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I never heard that term before.
The reason why I use the New American Standard is if you can pull up a chart. Do what?
No, I said mine says the same thing. You are bridegroom of blood.
What do you have? English Standard Version?
It's a study Bible.
Oh, okay. Well, so the reason why I use New American Standard is because if you look at there's a chart you can find online of different Bible translations, and it goes from most literal to paraphrase, like it's kind of like a pH scale kind of thing. And the New American Standard, among the popular translations, is like all the way over on the left, where it's at least still coherent. If you translate the Bible literally, the word order is messed up and all kinds of stuff.
They have a grading system.
Right.
About what grade level they're on.
Right. So here we have Moses' son being circumcised. This is going back to the covenant that God made with Abraham. Johnny?
Moses, go ahead. Well, I said Moses' son evidently hadn't circumcised him, but all of the children from Abraham was circumcised, and I'm sure Moses was circumcised because of his parents.
Now, what's interesting is that, real quick, Johnny. What's interesting is that whenever they go over the Jordan River, they have to circumcise a lot of the men again there. But Johnny?
Right, when it said that when the Lord met him, the Lord met Moses, or was it met his son? See, because the children of Israel, after 8 days, those boys were supposed to be circumcised.
Right.
And his wife, she took and circumcised him, and she held it against Moses because she had to be circumcised, and that's the reason she called him that. Said that up to him.
Yeah, it's sort of.
They were supposed to be cut off if they wasn't circumcised. They were supposed to be cut off. So when I imagine, I'm looking at it like the son was going to be taken away.
Yeah, it could be. I was looking at it more of God punishing Moses for not circumcising his son,
Right.
but it's kind of ambiguous there. The way that the pronouns kind of fit. It's hard to tell what exactly who exactly the Lord's looking to kill here, I suppose. But let's see, where's that again? Verse 24 and 25.
This is 24 said, in my Bible it said, and it came to pass by the way in the end that the Lord met him and sought to kill him.
See, I was reading this.
Yes,
Yes, that's how.
yeah.
It could be referred to Moses, but I can't see it referred to Moses because we go back 3 or 4 verses. God said, I want you to go down to Moses and do this. I want you to do this. You're going to go to Pharaoh. I'm going to send Aaron with you. I don't know if we got that yet. Aaron was going to meet him. And he was going to go down and he said, this is what you're going to do. But then I don't think God would turn around. Hey, he met him and was ready to destroy him, from doing what he said. I'm looking at it being the son that he was going to destroy because he hadn't been circumcised.
I guess it was the son because of the next verse. Because of the next verse, it said that, what verse that was? Oh yeah, it said, sought to kill him. And then it said, then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son. So that's probably what it's aiming at, is that he hadn't circumcised his son. And he evidently had been taught this by his mother because he knew some of the laws of the Hebrew, because he was taught, he was learned both in the Hebrew and Egyptian, way of life because of his mother.
Right. I was looking back at Exodus 2.
I'm sure he was already circumcised.
Right. I'll put a note on that. I'm going to go and look who that was because I just assumed that it was talking about God wanted to kill Moses for not circumcising his son. But I'm going to go back and do some research on that.
It was.
It's Joyce?
I was, mine said God threatened to kill Moses because Moses had not circumcised his son.
Yeah.
What is it?
That's the way it that I had looked at it, but evidently some reason Zipporah knew that the child had to be circumcised. God was going to do something to Moses because he hadn't circumcised the child.
I think this would be a lot easier to read if we were, 5th century BC Jews, reading this book, right? Zelda?
Maybe everybody got different translation in the Bible. Zipporah presented her son circumcised foreskin. When she threw the foreskin at Moses' feet, the Lord let him alone.
Oh, see, Mine doesn't say. Oh, so he let him alone, verse 26. Okay, now I see that. That's in the next verse. I don't know. We'll have to look. Because I assumed it was one way, but Johnny made a good point, so I'm going to have to go look it up and see the particulars of that verse. I'll go check out.
She was mad at Moses because of the reason. She was mad too because of that too. Bloody husband that art to me, because of that circumcision to me it looked like.
Bloody husband, that sounds like an album.
But I can't see him not his son not being circumcised because it said that what's his name? What was Moses' father-in-law name?
Jethro.
Jethro was a priest, and he should have known that too. But I don't know whether or not he was from Abraham line or not. I never studied that. But he was a priest. I don't know if it was the same way as Melchizedek, but he was a priest.
That's what I. That's what I. Otherwise, he'd be an Israel.
There's nothing about whether it was a priest of God or not.
Oh, did you have fun?
There's just another dynamic that's happening here. You were talking about translation going from the law to grace as well.
Right.
Because God don't sought to do anything. If He wants to do it, He does it.
Right. Yeah.
And you coming from the law, circumcision, and the whole conversation with that, and moving into grace.
But again, the law hadn't been even established.
But translation is coming.
Yeah, the law wasn't in at that time.
Right.
But Moses' family, from Abraham up until now, they were supposed to be circumcised. The family.
Right.
The law hadn't come, but this was that they were supposed to be circumcised.
Real quick, go to Joshua 5.
Joshua.
Yes. Joshua 5. Okay, Joshua 5, look at verse 1. Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, that their hearts melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, make for yourselves flint knives, and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time. So Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath Harloth. This is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war, died in the wilderness along the way after they came out of Egypt. For all the people who came out were circumcised, but that all the people who were born in the wilderness along the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. So there was a whole other period in Israel's history where none of the men were circumcised, and so God had them go through that again once they crossed into the Promised Land. So just an interesting note that goes back to the culture. They had been circumcising their children up to this point, but for whatever reason, Moses did not do that with his son.
Right.
But you know what? It'd be the same way that women is today. Women mostly would be the one that made sure that the child is circumcised. Maybe Moses took, for instance, that his wife would make sure that the child was supposed to be circumcised, and he just didn't really know at the time. But that's why the woman, Zipporah, through the foreskin, she threw the foreskin in front of Moses to let God know that the child had been circumcised. You know, because most of the time it's the woman that always makes sure that all of this stuff is done, right?
No, I think it was the men that was doing it. The priest who took them to that was later on, they took them to the priest and make sure this. That's why when you study the history of Jesus, when they presented him to the Lord, he had to be circumcised, I think 8 days after he was born.
Right, Miss Joyce, you want to add something to that real quick?
I was just going to say Moses' wife, due to her Mennonite background, she opposed about having that done, of him being circumcised.
Okay, that's interesting.
But I think going back to what Lonnie had said earlier, that
she was a Mennonite.
Right.
That would have been Moses' descendant by, what's her name? What Moses' last wife's name was?
What was that white man? Get
Yeah.
5 wives out of him.
This last wife that he married, and Midian was the one that took Joseph down in. That tribe took Joseph down into Egypt. So they would have been in the line of Abraham. Abraham must have taught them this too. I forget the lady name Moses married after Sarah died. I can't even think of her name.
Moses?
Moses.
Abraham.
Oh,
Abraham
okay. I was
married.
thinking.
Abraham married. I'm saying Moses when I'm Obi saying Abraham. Abraham married another woman after Sarah died. And he had some sons. And those sons are the one that took Joseph down in Egypt. 2 sons that they mentioned there about that really they was cousins in a sense. That I can't even think the lady name not, but there was a Midianite, but they mentioned another.
Yeah,
tribe.
Keturah.
Keturah.
Was her name, right?
Okay, yeah. But they mentioned another tribe first before they mentioned the Midianite. There was another tribe there along with them. And I can't remember the name of that tribe right now.
Well, find it out and tell it to us tonight.
Yeah, it was, they mentioned this tribe first, and then it said it was the Midianite that took them. So
Okay.
it was really probably another tribe along there with them. But I
Oh.
can't think of it right now. Can't think of it. Yeah, they got that right there in there. They got mentioned right there when they came along, but I can't think of it right now. They mentioned this tribe first, and then they mentioned Midianites later.
All right. Well,
So if he was a Midianite priest, he had to know about it too. Jethro.
could be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we are in Exodus 4:27, but we're kind of out of time now. So this last part is just whenever Aaron and Moses gathered the children of Israel together. And notice though that verse 27 that Aaron goes out to Moses and meets him and kisses him. So it's kind of like the prodigal son returning home, isn't it, in a sense? Okay, now what you do see though in verse 31 is that all the people believed. So they did trust that those signs were true from Moses. All right? Okay, that's the end of class today. Thanks for your participation. We'll go ahead and take a quick break before worship service.